terms of the projects that you spoke about and the ones that you're aware of, what would you say are the most successful projects? Naturally, you'll say they're all a success at some level. Tangibly, what do you feel is the most successful? And also, how do you think about measuring success?
I'm very schizophrenic on this, by the way. I mean, we talk for all night, and I don't want to put people to sleep here. Evidence-based, when I was doing work in healthcare, was both an opportunity and a challenge. And the challenge with it is that you couldn't do anything until you had the evidence. And the problem was that you needed to do something before you could get the evidence. So you could never do anything new. Absolutely, we need evidence. That's for sure. I think, what are things of being successful? A lot of the things we're working on have very long trajectories as part of the challenge. They might have 20-year sort of cycles to it. So we need to understand where we're going. We're going to the moon. And then what's the likelihood of us to get to the moon is maybe our success measure for the time being. And so did we launch off successfully? Is the astronaut still alive? And that's maybe the approach that we've sort of taken. And sometimes it's very small stuff. For example, we were running some of these what we call studios, which are basically some strategic planning sessions around large themes. And there was one public servant, and sort of fairly high-ranking public servant, that we wanted to get engaged. And it would take me about a month to get him to respond to an email, and then 2 months to get him on the phone, and we finally got him to dedicate a week. And after that, he was the one calling me, and I couldn't get back to him quick enough. So there is the stories that we can use to create a sense that there's actually momentum. Yes, the engines on the rocket are warming up.
Right, all right.
But then you get to the harder kind of stuff. Have we been able to do something cheaper than has been done before? In healthcare, could we save lives where the healthcare system cannot save lives? These were some of the things. And so maybe my last thought here is, and I'm trying my best to avoid the question, is...
I was going to come back to it, don't worry.
If you have a challenge, there's maybe two basic ways you could take. You could go the mainstream way, or you can go to the margins. And I think actually it's beneficial to go to the margins. So we did a whole bunch of work around rethinking education in Finland. And so we could have gone head on into a space where there's tons of experts, there's tons of metrics, and you're going to have to fight to get people to understand there's a different way, different metrics. Or you could deal with fringe problems that no one's interested in and show that you can create success where the system has failed. So we dealt with 16-year-old dropout boys that the system is just unable to deal with. So I think you have to be very strategic where do you start first, because you need to create successes to create momentum. So if you go mainstream with the very first thing you're going to do, you're going to hit a big brick wall, and you're probably going to fail, and no one's going to open the door for you a second time to do your design thing. So let me put it back in the cultural aspect. So I think generally speaking, the image of Finland is fairly positive. And one of the aspects and success factors in Finland has been our ability to have consensus on things. Now, consensus has been a great strength for us, especially as we move from the village cities, from agrarian to industrial country. It allowed us to move very quickly and to make some very fundamental shared values. But when you're starting an innovation process, it couldn't be anything more deadly than consensus. And unfortunately, the culture in Finland is of consensus. What I loved about the US is there was a can-do attitude. And if you had a good idea, just go for it. So my first day at work in Finland was, we thought we had a good idea and we started running. Until somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, that's not the way we do things here. You need to bring a committee together and vet your idea and get it approved. Well, we ignored that. Because you cannot assume that you're going to take all the stakeholders and then see what's the idea that everyone's willing to accept before you do anything. That's going to be the known and the most tepid idea possible. So what we've done is, on the other hand, you need multiple insights into things. You cannot assume that as an architect I can understand all the issues related to, say, development. So we built this studio model. And the idea of the studio model is you get 8 people in. What we talk about it as a Noah's Ark. If you had to save the 8 animals that are most critical to the theme that you want to solve, what would they be? So we did one on aging, for example. And we thought, well, you need the health economist on there. also because you won't be believable. So let's put him in there. But we also wanted a doctor in there. And actually we got a doctor who is specialized in the ethics of dying. Because as we get more and more with less and less resources, we're going to have really difficult questions. So you get this Noah's Ark. And they're experts. And they have expert perspectives. And the role of design there is then to be a bit like a CEO. It's not a facilitator, it's not a moderator, it's not like, okay, I'm going to help you guys come up with your solution. But it's really more active to say, let me bring synthesis to this conversation. Now, that is a kind of committee, you might argue, depends what you mean by committee, but it is a very different proposition of committee than the consensus. And it's unfortunately a political process, there's too much consensus. So we need to have the freedom early on to actually have kind of design team work that then can have propositions that actually then we can begin to have a political discussion. We could get into semantics to some degree. So the same way, like the question about design by committee, well, a lot depends what you mean by committee. And I might argue that this 8 people that are working on a problem in a highly integrated way is a sort of committee. But they're being selected by very different principles than the principles that govern normal committees. The same way, maybe expertise would be a better term than expert. But I think you need different expertise at the table. And this is the perennial debate, I don't know, even in academia, is we like integrated work and all this multidisciplinary. Well, what do you do that from day one? And so day one you come to school and everyone's doing everything. Well, nobody has anything unique to contribute. So at some point you need people to have something unique to contribute. So for me, co-creation is, yes, it's part of the democratic dimension to it, but it's also to say that there's different kind of expertise there. And maybe in that co-creation process, it's good to make sure that we have that range of expertise. Likewise, co-creation, I don't think is very helpful if you have the same gene pool talking, so to speak. What we found is when you're going to the moon, you may realize that you actually needed to go to Mars. So your mission changes a little bit along the way. So the question about outcomes is a bit fluid. And sometimes you need to recognize that what did not seem like a good an outcome was actually an outcome. I'll give you a couple examples. We ran these studios, as I mentioned now, a couple of times. One of them on aging, and what we do at the end of the studio week is we bring the team's strategic vision, or vision for strategic improvements, in front of a bunch of stakeholders. And then they propose also the 10 actionable things that you do right now to make that vision come to fruition. And we thought that these ideas would begin to be implemented. Of course, if you have a great idea, why wouldn't it happen? Well, that's not the way the political process works. That's not how decision makers like to move. But what we realized was 6 months later, the head of social services for the city of Helsinki was so impacted by the work that we've done that he wanted to hire designers for his organization. He has 13,000 social workers. He told me he does not need another social worker. He needs a different perspective because they're not creating a different product. So that's an intermediate. We got the engine, warmed up, but it was a positive outcome. If I go back to the Sustainable Development Project, the Low to No project, we changed the fire code. That's pretty big, right? Not just us, there's a bunch of other people. Then we get into a more difficult thing. When you're an operator like us, traceability is something I'm really interested in. And sometimes, because of the nature of what you're doing, we do a lot of Trojan horses. So, oh yeah, we're designers, we came to remodel your bathroom. But while we're remodeling the bathroom, we're putting something in the Kool-Aid, right? So, you may not be explicit about what it is that you're doing. You're using vehicles to try to do what you're doing. So changing fire codes was I think, a pretty big thing. The developers we worked with, they were furious at the idea that we would even go close to wood. Because they have a whole subcontracting, they have a whole industry based on making the most efficient concrete product. And here we're coming to tell them that you got to try this thing that you don't really know how to do, and you may bleed a few billion euros, but someday it will be a really good idea, right? They don't want to hear it. So they fought and they fought and they fought against it, right? And then 2 years later, they came out with another project that is to do a whole city block out of wood. And the CEO of the organization said, we would never have done this if we hadn't built the kind of evidence we're building with this project to give confidence that the benefits would outweigh the risks. Because anything you're doing that is not current is not real, and there's lots of risks. So you need to make the unreal aspect of it more real and the opportunity bigger. So these are some kinds of examples, and sometimes you're not in control of the outcomes per se. On the healthcare work we did, we had a very clear idea that we could actually save lives. That project actually, unfortunately, ran out of funding, but I am very confident that we could have saved lives, and that would have been indisputable. So a real objective, the work that we set up.
And in each of those cases, what is it about a design approach, a design method, which, if it hadn't been there, hadn't been brought to that project, would have not led to that result? Or, is it about being able to think laterally about things? Is it about synthesizing? Is it about being able to sort of cajole stakeholders in a certain way?
It's many things. So part of it is the skill set that we bring. So whether it's the visual tools we have and the ability to help visualize. When I was doing the healthcare project at Harvard, as you mentioned, I decided I put a kind of Noah's Ark of stakeholders. I learned the hard way. It makes no sense to come up with a great idea and then try to convince people it's a good idea. So as you're working on ideas, make those owners part of the process. So for stroke, I had the CEO of GE Healthcare as one of the advisors, Don Shalala, who used to be sort of the health minister in the US. They're pretty big, heavy hitters. And then I had the CEO of GE, this was slide number 2 of my presentation, stop me in my presentation and say, what software did you use? I was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. He says, I've never seen such a clear diagram in my life. And it was something quite basic. I was trying to describe what a care cycle, with the concept of a care cycle. And then I was shocked that here is somebody at the top of the pyramid. It must be getting information in a form that is actually not very legible. Like lots of reports probably. So anyhow, so there's tools we have, like our ability to visualize things, the ability to make things that then focus the conversation into something tangible, that then can lead to a different way of thinking about it. But we also bring, I think, a culture with us. The ability to deal with uncertainty. The notion that it's okay to iterate. For some other people, iterate is, well, I failed, now I'm going to try again, oh, I failed again, oh, I need to try again, oh, I failed again. For us, iteration is actually striving for something. So I think those are some things. We were talking very briefly that when I talk about design with people in the public sector, I tend to drop the word design out, because if it comes in the way of what we're actually trying to do. So if we're talking about healthcare and I say, oh, I think we need a design approach for this, they're, oh, so what's design? And then we spend an hour talking about design. So I like to think of design as a kind of leadership model.